How's it going, everyone? And welcome once again to another episode of Animal Talk Podcast in collaboration with SACA, the South African Animal Keepers Association. My name is Ryne.
And my name is Ayrton. Hey Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. As always, excited to be back for another episode of Animal Talk Podcast.
Episode 46. Yay! And exciting, it's been a year pretty much that we have been rebooted.
It has. It's actually quite insane to think about it. The time really has flown. It feels like it was just the other day that I first joined the podcast. So yeah, I can't believe it's been a year already.
Join the team.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting time, and here's to the next year of our podcast episodes.
Yeah, to another new year of getting some interesting topics and interesting guests on the podcast. I think we've been, very lucky with all the wonderful guests we've had this past year. It's been really inspiring, and yeah, I'm just very thankful for everybody that supported us and took the time to come onto the podcast and chat to us about various topics.
Yeah, definitely. A big thank you to all our guests that have been on the podcast so far. And yeah, thanks to our subscribers and supporters. And if you haven't subscribed to Animal Talk Podcast on YouTube,
Do it right now.
you better subscribe right now. Yeah. So we've got a cool topic to talk about.
We do. I thought, with our topics for the podcast, we always have different topics, and they're always at different levels because we're trying to cater for professionals that are in the animal care industry. We're trying to cater for, your pet moms and dads at home that are trying to do the best for their pets. So we always have these different topics, and they're always at different levels, and sometimes it's a topic that you think, isn't really too interesting. But for someone that doesn't use, a set topic every day because they're not in the, the working industry where they have to use these things in animal behavior or training or enrichment, for those that, aren't in the industry, there's so many things we can actually talk about that might seem quite basic, but it might be an entirely new, topic and world for some of our listeners. So today I thought we could actually go back to basics and we could talk about clicker training.
Click.
I actually don't.
Good job.
If I had my clicker, I could click it right now. But yeah, if you are listening to this episode and you're thinking, oh my word, what is this? Don't worry, we're going to break it down for you and go through some examples and hopefully have you clicker training by the end of this podcast.
Or clicker trained.
Or clicker trained, yeah.
Yeah, clicker training is pretty nice and basic for everyone to learn the bridge. So I'm keen to chat about it and let's see what we can get across to everyone.
Amazing. So I know if you aren't really much of an animal trainer and you're not doing animal training all the time, we're going to go right to the beginning, basically talk about positive reinforcement. And what that basically is when an animal shows you or provides you with the behavior that you want, you are going to reinforce that with something that the animal enjoys. Okay, so if Ryan gives me a chocolate and I say thank you and I tell him how great he is, it's very likely that that behavior is going to repeat again because I've done something that potentially Ryan enjoys, is me saying thank you and telling him how great he is. So for animals, what we have to do is we need to find kind of what their currency is. And when we talk about currency, we talk about the things that they like. For your pets at home, I know a few years ago, our family pet was a Cocker Spaniel, a dog, and he was quite strange. He actually really enjoyed carrots. So, it's just a really good example of your currency for your pet can be so specific to your individual animal and might be very different from what you might find reading up online about that particular breed or species. So try and find out what your animal really enjoys, and we're going to use that as our currency for positive reinforcement training.
You did such a good job.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Um,
I don't know. Have you got chocolates or anything so you can reinforce yourself?
I don't.
Marshmallows.
So once we've worked out that currency, we start obviously pairing that. Okay. So what we talk about with positive reinforcement is every time that desired behavior occurs, so whether we're asking a dog to sit, or we're asking for paw, or we're asking them to be quiet, then we want to reinforce them as soon as possible, close to that desired behavior. And kind of the rule of thumb that I like to use is like a 3-second rule. So it has to be within those 3 seconds after the desired behavior has occurred, and we want to give them that treat, because you want to make sure that the animal understands that this is the behavior right over here that I'm being reinforced for. Now, the problem that we encounter is sometimes behaviors happen and we can't reinforce that animal immediately. So if I'm asking, if I'm doing a send off with a dog and I'm asking it to go station, or an easier word to understand is to sit on a particular, spot, might be further away down in the garden. Obviously, I can't reinforce that dog by, standing where I'm standing, asking for the desired behavior. So what we want to introduce now is what we call a bridge. And basically, that's where clicker training comes in. If you've been to other facilities, you might have seen them use dog whistles. So it's a sound stimulus that we basically start pairing. And what it allows us to do is it allows us to mark a desired behavior that's occurring where we can't actually reinforce that animal directly in that moment. So another really simple example would be if a trainer asks a dolphin to do a really high bow in the center of a pool, and obviously the trainer cannot get food to that animal as it's performing that behavior. So we need to add a bridge in, and that would be the whistle or the clicker, and that would then basically take over telling the animal that right there where that sound stimulus is given is what the desired behavior was, and you've basically done a good job. So what we need to first do with that is we decide what our bridge is going to be. It could even be a verbal cue. It could be good. It could be a whistle. It could be a dog clicker. What we're going to then do is start basically what we call charging that clicker with that currency, so that the dog first understands. If you just use a clicker when you're training a dog for the first time, it's not going to understand the value of what that clicker means, what that sound means. So what we have to start doing is charging it, and basically how we do that is we click, and as we click, we are reinforcing at the same time. Or let's talk about feeding and then clicking at the exact same time. So that the understanding is that every time I get food, I'm also hearing the sound, and vice versa. When I hear that sound, I get something nice to eat. Or, yeah, I don't know if there's anything you want to add at this point.
Yeah, so pretty much covered everything there. That's the good start to it, and I think it's very important to also understand that using those devices like a whistle or a clicker, the reason why we use them is because even though the word good can be a bridge, it can be different for each person or depending on how you're feeling that day. And animals can pick up on that slight change in your tone or a change in a person's voice. So, to avoid those unavoidable changes, we use devices like clickers and whistles as a bridge. So, just wanted to put that forward.
Yeah, I mean, if you hear Ryan and I say the word good, we both say it very differently, maybe with different expressions, maybe with different duration, and that tends to be the problem with using a verbal cue. So today I might be saying good, which is kind of ideal of how we want to use it. It needs to be very short and brief. But on other days, I might be a little bit lazy and I might be saying good. So just that shift in the bridge is not ideal, and that's why we prefer using things like clickers and whistles, because they're more universal, they're more precise, and there's less chance of the animals getting confused when we use them. So
100%.
also what you're going to start seeing is, as we're charging that clicker or that whistle or that bridge, whatever we're going to be using, we're going to start clicking and then delaying the reinforcer. And what you're going to start seeing is the animal, as soon as it hears the click, it's going to start looking for the reinforcer. And that is the indication that that animal understands, whenever I hear the sound, I expect something good is coming. That's one way that we can understand that the animal has kind of grasped the concept of what that clicker means. And then we can start applying it in different ways.
Exactly. And it's so cool to get to see those animals when they eventually have that aha moment where they realize that, as you click or as you blow that whistle, something's going to happen. So you'll normally get them looking straight at you like, okay, now where's my reinforcer? And then you know exactly, okay, I've got that on. And now you can pretty much build up on that because if you're a dolphin trainer, for example, seeing as though we've been talking about dolphins for the last 3 episodes, the dolphins far on the other side, it does the behavior you want to bridge the behavior of when it's doing a full on jump and you want to bridge it right in the middle of the jump. You bridge in the middle of the jump because that's what you want. The animal hears the bridge and then will now back into the water and swim to you for the reinforcer. So you kind of explain that, but that kind of just gives where you're going to go to that next level.
Yeah, I think that leads to a very important point that, and that's why we always say timing is everything. Because now when you start marking behaviors, so especially if an animal is offering you different behaviors all at once and you're trying to mark a specific behavior by clicking and then reinforcing or using the bridge as a that's what I want, it's really important that you are spot on with your bridging. And that's also a really good example. So if a dolphin is doing a jump, you're going to bridge when the dolphin's at the highest point. Because if you are bridging when the dolphin's just coming out the water, you're telling the animal that that's the behavior you want at a much lower height. So it's really interesting
Yeah.
with bridging how, if it's not precise, you're actually marking different behaviors. Another really important thing, and it's always what we say with specifically with training sessions, is it's really, really important to record yourself. Put up a phone, put up a GoPro, record the session, because you will pick up on your mistakes. That's the only way you can improve. So bridging it can be tricky, but once you've grasped the concept, and you also, you have to be prepared, because sometimes the animals learn so quickly and they start offering you a desired behavior that you might be working towards, but they already understand what you're asking. So they present the behavior to you before you were actually ready for that behavior to occur. And you need to bridge on time to really try and capture that behavior as well.
Yeah, I think you bring up another good point, and that is the offering of behavior. So we'll have to extend a little bit on that because you will get very enthusiastic animals once they know what's happening with their training and that they get a reinforcer for the bridge. They will start offering up behaviors. And what tends to happen, especially if you're a new trainer, you start seeing those behaviors. You're like, oh, that's exactly what I want. Let me just reinforce for it. Did you ask for the behavior yet? Because if you didn't ask for the behavior, you may be training a completely different situation. So always remember that when you ask for the behavior and the animal does the behavior, that's when you bridge. If the animal offers the behavior and you're not building the behavior, you've already built the behavior, but it's offering it and you haven't asked for it, it's not a good idea to bridge that behavior and reinforce it because you're not giving the animal clear communication. You're just telling it you can do whatever you want and I'll bridge and reinforce you for whatever you do. And that's kind of where you need to be sure that your communication is clear and precise. Going back to your timing, I can't stress any more of how important it is because the slightest second out when you bridge can change the whole behavior. And I've seen it happen. So when I'm working with some new trainers, what I tend to do is I give them a chance to get into a group. So you grab a partner, and you can do this when you're at work, at lunch, or whatever. Grab a partner and say, we're going to do some training fun. And that is one person has a clicker and one person does a behavior, and you try and catch them at that point with the clicker. So you're practicing your timing, and it's all about getting the correct, because some people are a little slower at reaction, and it's like playing tennis. You need to kind of be fast to hit the ball. So you learn how to do that. And by playing the game of trying to catch the correct behavior without damaging an animal's behavior, you're just doing it with your partner and your friend at lunch. You're kind of building up that muscle memory of how quick you need to click the clicker or blow the whistle.
Yeah, it's timing. You know that saying, timing is everything, is really when when it comes to this. But it's really fun once you've got the hang of it, and once you understand, the principles, and you putting it into practice. It's especially when I think you're training with a new animal. It's actually quite fun to work with them, and you can see how quickly they learn, but also how effective clicker training can be. I had it a few years ago where I was trying to get stingrays to come over to a target and then touch the target, and then we would reinforce. And at that time, I wasn't using a clicker. I was just showing the target and then reinforcing when they came to the target. And what we were then wanting to do was have the stingrays come up higher in the water column, so they're feeding more closer to the surface, because it was quite a shallow exhibit. And everything I tried with slowly moving the target up and then reinforcing with food, it just didn't. It worked to a degree, but it took them a really long time to understand. And then we would go back the next week, and we would try ask for the behavior again with the target near the surface, and they wouldn't understand it. We'd have to drop the target right to the bottom again, and then work our way slowly up the window to get them to feed from the surface. And then I thought, why don't we try clicker training? Because we know they're stingrays, and if we have something that produces a loud enough sound underwater, they're going to pick up on that vibration or that sound. So I used quite a loud clicker, like one of the louder dog clickers that I could find, and went kind of back to basics. Started with just charging the clicker first, and then presenting the target, and then bridging, and then reinforcing. And it made like the world of difference. Within, I think, a week, I was able to get them moving higher up in the water column on their own, and they never regressed in that behavior either. So yeah, it really does work. Sometimes you look back and you're like, I understand the principles, but I didn't understand that it would be that impactful by just having a bridge added, into training. So yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it's pretty mind blowing how quickly a simple thing like that can change a behavior, where the timing, you create a timing. There's not even a word really that I can think right now, but it's sort of that bridge is that timing gap that allows you to tell the animal that's what you're looking for. And it's so powerful when that happens. And when you have that aha moment that the animal goes, oh, yeah, sure, no problem. And then you're like, why didn't I do this in the first place? But yeah, it's really important. But also to remember that as much as we say the bridges are important, you must make sure. Some people forget that when they click the clicker, they need to reinforce. It does happen. We all human, and that can regress your behavior. So always remember that once that clicker is clicked, in as fast as time as you possibly can, you have to get the reinforcer in. Because if you start breaking that down by forgetting to reinforce or blazing the clicker, which is another thing we can talk about, you're going to break down the behavior.
Yeah, I think, timing is important, and consistency is important. So it's really important that when you are using that clicker or that bridge, that you really understand the power that it has with the animal, and that you also don't take that power for granted. You understand, you know, the understanding that that animal has with it and what it means, and just don't take it for granted and overuse it without reinforcing, because as Ryan mentioned, that's it's going to go the opposite way in terms of your training plan. And you always want that, you want that clicker to always be a positive thing. So always kind of respect when you're using it and be mindful of when you're using it and how you're pairing it and the timing when bridging as well, as we mentioned, because all of that contributes to the overall effect of what that has in a training session when working with the animal.
100%. And to go back to what I mentioned, the blazing clicker, it's it's something that I've seen happen a lot, and it's something that a trainer tends to fall back onto because I think a lot of the time we're short for time, the first thing. The second thing is we don't want to feed the animal too much food, so we're trying to get a big behavior or a lot of behaviors in a line, and we're trying to tell the animal yes that, yes that, yes that, yes that. So what people tend to do is they start clicking the clicker for every behavior that they're doing, but they're not pairing the reinforcer with the behavior anymore, with the clicker, sorry. So what's happening is the behavior is happening and they're clicking for it, but they're not giving a reinforcer. They're only giving a reinforcer after 5 or 6 clicks. And that can cause a huge regression in the behavior because you're not pairing your reinforcer with that bridge that you've just done.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that the clicker and the process of using clickers and bridges, for example, is to really help with communication. As we mentioned, with the Ray example, it was just the clicker made it so much easier for them to understand that, oh, the target's there. I'm touching it with my nose. Oh, I hear that sound, and that means I'm doing the right thing. So it really allows you to, what we'll probably talk about next, which is shaping behavior using clickers. But it's so important to understand that it it provides clarity in your communication with you and the animal during the training session. So when you start doing things like clicking and not, reinforcing with food, for example, what you're essentially doing is you're breaking down that communication, and that often leads to things like frustration. You're going to start seeing undesired behaviors that you didn't necessarily ask for, and overall confusion. And I think that's really important to understand so that you don't get to a place like that. If you do finding, and I mean, it does happen. So if you do find that, if you have been doing some clicker training and that's where you are at with one of your animals, it's very simple. You need to just go back to basics. So I would say go all the way to the beginning, start again with charging the clicker. So, you know, giving food and clicking at the same time, and then seeing if the animal is back to understanding that when I click, I get food, and then build it up from there. So it's really important to understand where your animal's at with the understanding. And if you've made a few mistakes, it it is sometimes a bit more complicated when there has been mistakes made, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's how it has to be. There is a way that you can fix it, and it's always just going back a step and meeting the animal where they're at with the training.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, and that is that even though you've got to this far in the behavior that you're doing, it's okay to take a step back, and it's okay to bring it back to basics a bit, just to sort of more reinforce that behavior that you want to try and get a good, strong behavior. If you're seeing regression in the behavior and it's not happening at the times you're wanting it to happen, or the animal's feeling not so keen on doing it, just bring it back, tone it down a bit, and try and build it up again. And then, like you said, that brings us into shaping behavior.
Yeah, I think also going with that, you've just made me think of an animal that I got to work with when I first started, and it was probably initially me still working out clickers and training and positive reinforcement, but it was probably one of the best lessons that I've learned from an animal. And it was a turtle that was target trained, and it would just bite everything. It was this constant problem that we would have, that this particular animal would tend to bite people, specifically if they were wearing red, because that was the color of the target we were using. And when we sat and we looked back and started really recording the sessions and really paying attention, and I think that's really also an important lesson, is don't just show up to a training session and be there. You have to show up and actually, physically, mentally, emotionally, you have to be there. You need to be paying attention to everything you're doing, from your body language to your timing to, you know, how you're communicating with people around you during that training session as well, if there's more than one person helping. So you have to be very, very present. And with this particular animal, what we eventually worked out was we were reinforcing. We weren't using a clicker at that stage, but we were reinforcing her every time she approached the target with her mouth open. And every time she would bite at the target, we would actually reinforce her. So we had basically done a really good job of teaching her to bite stuff that was red. So every time she bit her target that was red, we would reinforce. And it took us a really long time. I remember just standing, working with her in the medical pool for quite a few afternoons, just trying repeatedly. And only way at that time I could think of doing it was try ignore when she does bite, and then try reinforce when she doesn't. And it took a really long time, and it would really get frustrating because you'd be like, oh my word, like you just didn't bite the previous time. You've just come in, you didn't bite the target, we got to reinforce you, and now you've come back in and you're biting at the target again, and you'd have to we would wait it out and then try reinforce. So it was really tricky, but eventually we got it right. And that was simply, because we had trained the wrong behavior, we had reinforced at the wrong time. So it was a really important lesson to learn about timing and just really paying attention to what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. That's where you see those behaviors can regress and go into weird behaviors like the biting of the target. And it's not as easy to get rid of those behaviors because sometimes those behaviors can be reinforcing in themselves. So when you ignore the behavior and try and redirect the behavior, they get frustrated and maybe, for example, start biting at the target again, and then you've got yourself into trouble again. So it can be difficult. So you've got to sort of pull it back a bit and start working on it again. And but again, each animal is different, so each one's going to be a different thing. So you've got to assess the situation as you move through your training.
Yeah, and as you mentioned that now, I think it's from Corin Pryor's Don't Shoot the Dog. I think that's where the reference is coming out from. But I remember specifically with that animal, and I think it was in Don't Shoot the Dog, that it literally says with the undesirable behavior that it's going to get worse. It's going to increase in frequency before it diminishes. So if you are trying to, work out undesired behavior from a particular training that you're doing, just always, and I've always kept that, in the back of my mind, it has to get worse. It's going to increase. Whatever you try, it's gonna increase quite a bit, and then the animal will start, showing less of that behavior. And if you think of the example with the turtle, it's only natural because, I'm showing up, I'm doing the behavior you've reinforced me and trained me to do, and like, what the heck? You're not giving me any food now. Like, this doesn't make any sense. So let me try again. Wait, you're still not doing, let me try again. So, if you think of it from a behavioral perspective, if you go back to when you were a small kid and you're trying to get your way, or you do a specific behavior because it's going to get a reaction, what do you do when it doesn't work? You try it again and you try it again. So also just keep that in mind, that when that does occur, it's probably just the animal trying to communicate with you. Like, I don't really understand what's going on here.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like the way you put that across. It's always important to make sure that you're understanding how the animal is feeling in any way that you possibly can. And just also remember when you're training and you're starting out training and using all these techniques, that the animal's history behavior is important to understand, and their natural behavior is important to understand. Because if we're asking an animal to do something that's a little bit out of its stretch of what it would do naturally, you're going to have issues trying to get it to do those behaviors. So always remember, look at what animal you're working with, their natural behaviors, what they're capable of, and their history and what other behaviors they've done in the past. But we could go on forever talking about setting up those behaviors. But I think what we should do is talk a little bit more about this in our next episode.
We can indeed. I actually didn't, once you start on a topic, you start unpacking everything, you actually realize like how much,
There is to talk about.
not only how much there is to talk about it, but actually how much we know about the topic.
Yeah,
And it really does bring up, all these memories of all these different, I like to think of them as our teachers in the industry that we've worked with. And of course they're the animals,
indeed.
and the many things they've taught us. And, we really wouldn't be the animal keepers and trainers that we are today without those animals.
Yeah, thanks to the animals, definitely. They've taught us a lot through the years. But if you do have any questions, maybe about starting out with a clicker or whistle, or what you have experienced with bridging, please let us know. Give us some of your take on bridges and using the clicker or a whistle. And you can pretty much send us an email on animal.talk201@gmail.com, or you could get hold of us on our many social media platforms.
Yeah, reach out to us on Animal Talk Podcast _ZA. That's our handle. And as Ryan mentioned, we are on pretty much everywhere: YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So go and like our various profiles. You can also contact us through those profiles as well. Yeah, let us know what you're getting up to with clicker training. If you have any questions, if you're interested in starting, we also to help. So reach out to us and let us know what you're up to.
Definitely. And also, like, comment, share, and don't forget to subscribe. It's really important because that pushes our podcast to as many people as we can get it to. And that's exactly what we want with our podcast. We want lots of people to be able to benefit from our podcast and the information that we put across. If you do want to know anything more about SACA, the South African Animal Keepers Association, down in the bottom of the description of each podcast, you will find a link to those social media platforms as well as email addresses. And also a big thank you to eRadio for putting us out on the airways on a Saturday at 10 a.m. But from myself, animals are our passion.
Thanks everybody for tuning into another episode, and remember that our quality of care is their quality of life. Bye everyone.
Bye bye. Of course, Snowy in the background at the end. Ooh, ooh,
She's also
ooh,
like,
bye, bye,
bye,
bye.
bye.
I love it. Okay, I'm going to end this one. That was a good one.